Hello, this is Beverly from scrapandthread.blogspot.com. Today I wanted to share with you how I stamp very large stamps and I have some tips and some suggestions. This particular stamp set is quite large and I stamped it first with the black Memento ink and then I colored it in, and the other one there I had stamped with the archival ink and watercolored it. And I'm going to show you some ideas to how to use those. This happens to be an image, it's a big and bold image from the Colorado Craft Company, and that image can be used on a 5x5 square card or a 5x7 card, or it will hang over a regular standard card. Here I used it as the background for a scrapbook layout, and I didn't color it in. I let the photographs and the cardstock, the colored cardstock, kind of bring the pops of color there. But I really love the image. It made a beautiful, crisp image there, and I thought it was a really nice way to showcase the photographs. So I'm going to show you how I use the Tim Holtz stamp platform to get a good image. I have used a Fiskars stamp. It's a thing that you mount the stamp on, and it has little sponges on the corners. And when I've used that in the past, I ended up getting kind of a wobbly look, and I don't really care for that as much. So this stamp platform works really well for this kind of large stamp, but there are a couple little tips that I have to add to that. So I'm using the black archival ink, and I stamped it down, and you can see that there's an open space in the middle, and that isn't part of the image. So I'm going to add some more ink and fix that. And I'm going to put in a shim because the stamp platform has little magnets for the card to sit on. All I have to do is lift that up there, and it will make the image go exactly on top of where it was before, so you won't have any echoing or shadowing. And that shim that I have there is actually just a paper towel, but you could use cardstock, anything that's kind of thin that will help kind of push up your cardstock that you're putting your image on. I really like to stamp on my art journals, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to use this stamp platform by pulling off that part of the platform, because you can use that with rubber stamps or clear stamps. And so now we're going to use it just kind of as a gigantic stamp block to stamp onto my art journal that I've already done a little bit of prep work on. Sometimes I will take a stamp and just use it on my hand and stamp it any way that I want it onto my art journal. I don't always use blocks, but in this case I wanted to show you another way to use your stamp platform. This is a really great versatile tool, and so hopefully you can find a good use for it. So the substrate has already been painted with gesso, and then I've sprayed some dilutions and some mica mist from Tonic Studios on there. So it does have a little bit of a rough surface. And because of that, the image is not going to be very crisp or clear. So you can see I'm pushing kind of hard on there to try to make my image show up. And I'm okay with the fact that it's sort of a hazy thing. So I'm going to show you another way, and this is the way I normally stamp on my art journals, is I do try to use some kind of a platform, but it doesn't have to be an actual stamp platform. So in this case, I'm using the Memento ink and stamping up the stamp, but I'm using the carrier sheet that the stamp is on, and it's very moldable, so I can use it flat and just stamp it normally, or I can also just use parts of it and kind of bend it to the way that I want it to be. For me, part of the fun in art journaling is that there really are no rules and there's really no right or wrong. And you just do what feels good for you to do, how you want it to look. If you don't like the way it looks, you can paint over it. And in this particular instance, I'm just using this as a background, as part of another layer of my background. So I'm not really particular about how it's going to turn out. So I am going to use the stamp platform again, and this time I'm going to use some distress inks, and I think it's worn lipstick and peeled paint there. And the technique that I'm doing here is it's called ghost stamping or no line stamping, and the reason why I'm using the distressed inks on this particular one is that this image is so large, it really lends itself nicely to beautiful watercoloring. And I like to use distress inks for watercoloring, and I'm going to show you using my reinkers rather than the ink pads for most of the media that I'm going to use. Now, I could have masked off the leaves and the stem so that the green and the pink wouldn't have run into each other, or vice versa. I could have masked off the flower, but because it is a kind of a watercolor look that I'm going for, I'm okay with it not being masked. And because I've already used this image on the stamp platform, I know that I need a shim on there, so I put my paper towel back down. And I just stamped it down. I like the distress inks to be particularly kind of juicy, so I'm going to stamp it again because I am going to try to pull out some of that ink from the paper to help with the watercolor effect. And I did stamp it on the smoother side of the paper. When I'm stamping, I prefer to use that side.
And then you can use your inks and mash them down on your mat, and then use a watercolor brush, or if you have a water pen, you can use one of those. You can certainly use any kind of watercolors you have. I use colored pencils on the other one, but in this case, I'd rather just use my reinker bottle and get a little bit of color from that instead of smashing down my, because I don't need very much, instead of smashing down my ink pad and then having to refill it anyway. This is just an easier way to do it. And I don't mind using this one with the little bowls because I'm not mixing the colors on here. If I was going to mix the colors, I'd use the flat spot of the paint. I've got some little extra water here. And this one doesn't have any water in it. I'm just using, well, I guess it has a little bit of water in it, but I'm not really using it that way. I'm just using it as a paintbrush at this point. So I'm going to see where I'm at with this. And then you just start kind of painting.
I like to make one side a little darker than the other, but with watercolor, you're kind of at the mercy of the water. You do the best you can as you're going along, and that's part of the fun of watercolor is that it's very free-flowing, and you get a really cool effect. So you put in your shading where you're aiming for, and the more you do it, the better you get at it, I think. This is a wet on dry application. The paper was dry to begin with, and so I'm adding all the moisture in there. I wanted to have some additional shadowing and kind of definition on the image. And so I've decided to stamp it again, and this time I'm using a darker color. It's Festive Berries, and I'm using the Distress Oxide ink. When it gets wet, it has a really vibrant color, and the image that I was painting is still a little bit wet, so we'll see if it shows up a little bit more vibrant or not. But the idea behind it is that this will kind of give it some, not a lot of, crazy definition, but it definitely will draw attention to the lines of the design. And that is the idea behind that image, is you want to be able to recognize that it is a really beautiful flower. So that helps with that part. And because I knew from before, I should have remembered that I needed my shim to get that extra little bit in there. It looks fine the way it is. I just thought, well, I already have it there. I might as well go ahead and stamp it again. And I don't even need to put any more ink onto the stamp. It'll work just fine. Okay, and now I'm going to add some broken china to kind of make those colors of the flower and the stem pop, just by doing kind of an outline and a background for the flower, and kind of as a watercolory effect again. So I just used a tiny bit of the re-inker on my little tray and add in as much water as I feel looks good. And it's a really fun technique. If you didn't want to paint the background or have something in the background there, you could fussy cut this flower and the stem and the leaves out and use it that way as well. You're the creator, you can do what you want to. So now I'm going to show you how I stamp with a wood-mounted stamp. This is a red rubber stamp, and I think it's a Stampin' Up! Stamp from quite some time ago. And you want to apply your ink directly to the stamp with this stamp side up, so you can see that you're getting really good coverage. It's really important because it is a large surface. And then you'll put your cardstock on top. And then usually I put a piece of scratch paper or something like that on top of that so that I don't get ink all over my hands. However, I am a messy stamper and I end up getting ink on it. Another thing that I like to do is use a brayer, but if you have the piece of paper on top of the cardstock and then use a brayer, then usually what happens is it smears because it moves around a little bit and it smudges. So I wasn't thrilled with that one because that is exactly what happened. So typically I either use the piece of paper on top of the cardstock and swish it with my hand, or in this case, I will show you, I just use the cardstock and then I use the brayer on top of that. But what happens with this is, once again, because I am a messy stamper, I end up getting ink on my brayer, which gets ink on the back of the cardstock, which is really no big deal because it's going to be adhered to something else anyway. And this image is much better. Now, because I had shown you how I had colored in or painted on the distressed inked stamped image, I wanted to explain how I had done the one that was stamped with the Ranger Archival Rose Madder ink pad. I used watercolor pencils and colored in all of the very darkly shaded areas. I figure that the artist who came up with the stamp had gone to the trouble to do all of that for me already, so I kind of followed their lead and I used that to color over. So after applying the watercolor pencil to the image, I used a pipette which has water in it, and then I could kind of focus where I wanted the water to go, and that was a way to get a lot of water onto the paper in a kind of a controlled way. And then I used a watercolor brush to finish painting it out and to take the color into the areas for the shading that I wanted to have. Now on this one I'm using a colored pencil to do the background. I do think it's really important to have something to anchor your image, whether it's by painting something in the background or having some other images back there from fussy cutting and then setting it on pattern paper or solid paper, whatever it is that you want to do. But the way that I'm using this colored pencil, it's a watercolor pencil, and I'm just taking the water brush and gathering up some pigment from the pencil and then painting it onto the cardstock. And actually, excuse me, it's not cardstock, it's watercolor paper. And I think this creates a really nice effect, and it's a very controlled way to get color where you want it without making indentations in your cardstock with the pencil. Thanks for joining me today. If you have any questions, please comment below or visit my blog. Take care.